Well, let's speak to the former Canadian Minister of Immigration, Chris Alexander, who joins us now live. Good to have you with us, Chris. This diplomatic row seems to be gathering momentum. Just how serious is it?
Well, I think it's very serious. Disappointing and surprising behavior from the Saudi side. And listen, Canada has taken very strong positions on Russia's invasion and occupation, illegal occupation of Ukraine, but we still have ambassadors operating in Ottawa and Moscow. For Saudi Arabia to take this extreme step over one human rights activist who has been brought to the attention of the world, not just by Canada, but by many countries and many human rights organizations, is extraordinary. And I think the Saudis will only draw more attention to the very troubling situation inside their country by taking this kind of, by overreacting in this way.
Does Canada have the moral high ground here? Because it does continue to sell weapons to Saudi Arabia. And of course, there are question marks over Saudi's involvement in, for example, Yemen as a matter of human rights. So can Canada claim to have the moral high ground?
Well, I think we definitely can. We received undertakings from Saudi Arabia with regard to the military equipment we are selling them that they would not be used. That this equipment would not be used to repress minorities internally or for aggressive purposes outside the country. We're monitoring that situation closely. But let's look at the broader picture. Human rights, women's rights, Canada and other countries very much have the upper hand and the moral high ground because women and girls the world over understand that their rights and their opportunities are greater in countries like Canada than they are in the Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is an outlier on these issues. It is not a question of Saudi Arabia. Human rights are universal aspirations of every person on this planet, and they will continue to receive peer review and judgments and assessments about their performance internally, as every country does.
Do you think it puts a big question mark over the reforms that have been carried out thus far by the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, which he says are all about modernising Saudi society?
Well, I think it reminds us that it's going to take more than giving women driver's licenses for women's rights in Saudi Arabia and other countries in the region and beyond that region to be fully respected. And you cannot hope to put a little window dressing out for the international community to enjoy and then claim that everything is fine when it is not fine. Raif Badawi set up a website to talk about democracy in Saudi Arabia. He has received the threat of the death penalty. He has been flogged. These are things that definitely hasn't existed in Canada for decades. Flogging is considered by us a form of torture. We haven't done it for centuries. And so Saudi Arabia is out of step with the world on these issues. And Canadians are not inclined to back down in the face of bad behavior, as we have seen in the case of Raif Badawi, and as we see every day with regard to the systematic violation of women's rights in Saudi Arabia, not to mention the absence of democracy.
OK, but clearly these ties between Saudi and Canada must be very important, the trade ties particularly, but now they've suspended this educational exchange programme. And I understand there are many Saudi men and women who are currently studying in Canada. So where is this all going to lead?
Well, we would be very sad to lose the thousands of Saudi students that pursue higher education in Canada. But to be honest, they are a rounding error in the overall picture. It would be Saudi Arabia's loss and the loss of these young people, opportunity lost for these young people if they were to take that step. With regard to our other trade relations, it'll be up to the ball's in Saudi Arabia's court. We are not dependent on trade with Saudi Arabia. We would gladly prefer, most Canadians would prefer not to import oil from Saudi Arabia. And we certainly don't want to be participating in a relationship that helps a regime pass off major human rights violations, major violations of women's rights as a detail that needs to be swept under the carpet. Canadians, and I think citizens around the world are not inclined to let these things go. There's another issue here as well. Saudi Arabia is engaged in a very important competition for influence in the world in its long-term rivalry with Iran. The EU is tilting Iran's way. The United States is tilting Saudi Arabia's way. Countries like Canada are wondering which way to tilt. And if Saudi Arabia proves to have no better a human rights record than the disastrous Iranian and repressive Iranian regime, then we're certainly not going to be on their side.
Some interesting points there. Pleasure to speak with you. Thank you very much indeed for that. That's Chris Alexander, the former Canadian Minister of Immigration.